Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Iran Explained after a very long time. It has been almost 3 years now. Wow. Anyway, I'm trying to restart uploading to this channel with a slightly different approach, and I hope you like it. Today's video is about a very sensitive topic, a topic very close to my heart. It's about this year's events in Iran, and more specifically, the massacre that happened. Well, more precisely, it's about the video titled When the Iranian Government Massacred Its Own People on the Into the Shadows channel with their host Simon Whistler. Now, before I start, I have to say that I'm a fan of this channel and all the channels that Simon Whistler hosts, and I watch a lot of his content, all the Nazi videos. So you can imagine how happy I was when I saw the specific video about the massacre in Iran. The fact of the matter is, the event has been either downplayed or outright ignored by many media outlets. So anyone who tries to explain it to the world makes me regain my faith, or some faith, in humanity. So as I said, when I saw the thumbnail, I instantly clicked on it. Now I want to tell you whether what I watched was actually a good representation of reality, in my opinion of course, or not. The video is about the Iranian government, what I call the Islamic regime, and the massacre that was committed in January of this year. To my knowledge, despite a few shortcomings here and there, Simon does attempt to explain how the Islamic Republic has treated people and responded to dissent over the past 5 decades, as well as what had happened in the recent uprising. But what I found strange was the attempt to misrepresent the past or pre-revolutionary Iran and the omission of key parts of today's story that are very relevant to recent events. Let me explain. The video tries to make the case that Iran has been in turmoil since the beginning of the 20th century all the way to today. But many things Simon says about 1979 revolution are actually repetitions of what revolutionaries were saying at the time against Mohammad Reza Shah. The problem is that now, decades after the revolution, many of those claims have been proven false or not entirely accurate. For example, this one.
Remained relatively stable in the region until 1953, and it all came down to oil. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company had seen huge profits for years, much of it leaving Iran and trickling back to certain pockets in the UK. So, when Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh announced that Iran would be nationalizing its oil industry, therefore keeping profits in Iran, the UK wasn't exactly happy. The US also wasn't impressed, and together the Anglo-American tag team threw their weight behind an internal coup that forced Mossadegh out and placed more power with the Shah, who, of course, was more than happy to open things up even more and allow the two foreign nations to continue bleeding Iran dry.
He's right about the conflict being internal and about the British and Americans trying to support one side over the other. The most they did, however, was spend some money to publish materials here and there in the newspapers or buy a couple of politicians or clerics. Their actual attempt at orchestrating the toppling of Mossadegh had already failed a couple of days before he was overthrown. Also, what happened in 1953 was not a coup, neither external or internal. The Shah had appointed Mossadegh and was able to remove him according to the constitution. I won't go into the details of Mossadegh's own unconstitutional actions, that needs a separate video. Also, after Mossadegh was removed, nationalization was not reversed. The NIOC retained ownership and Iran received a 50-50 split. It's a long story and, as I said, needs another video. Now listen to this.
And yet, there were some glaring issues. Firstly, the Shah had become a tyrannical yet smiling despot with an outrageous lust for luxury. In October 1971, he held what was, by most accounts, one of the most extravagant celebrations in modern history. It was staged in the ruins of Persepolis, the ancient capital of the Persian Empire, and was meant to mark 2,500 years of Persian monarchy. The Shah wasn't just presenting himself as a ruler, he was placing himself in a line that stretched back to Cyrus the Great, and he threw a party that reportedly cost around $100 million in past money. Today, $800 million. The Shah's party infuriated many across Iran at a time when the gap between rich and poor was becoming a gaping divide. Yes, the country seemed to be doing well, but millions were struggling.
While it's true that many ordinary people thought the anniversary celebrations were a waste of money, it should also be considered that those ceremonies rebranded Iran and put the country on the global stage. They led to influx of tourists and a boom in tourism in the following years. If the revolution had not happened, people might have benefited from the rebranding even more. Also, the ceremonies were only a small part of a much bigger plan. There was a major overhaul of Iran's infrastructure, streets, roads, hospitals, stadiums, and schools. These are the things Iranians continue to benefit from decades after the revolution. I'll say it again. Yes, some parts of the ceremonies may have been excessive, and many people, perhaps mistakenly, were opposed to the ceremony as a whole, but they were not a sign of despotism or luxury obsession. Now listen to this one.
By the mid-70s, anger was rising and the Shah's security forces responded in a way that dictatorships tend to. People were dragged away, never to be seen again. Fear was prevalent, and many assumed spies were everywhere. In 1978, massive protests exploded across Iran, and while the Shah hung on, he was eventually forced to flee the following year. Ruhollah Khomeini returned to Iran and received a welcome of astonishing size, with millions greeting his plane or gathering in Tehran.
The monarchy, of course, was not democratic, but judging it by today's standard is not fair. Most of the Shah's opposition were armed Islamist or communist groups. They carried out acts of terrorism, assassinated prime ministers, and even attempted to assassinate the Shah multiple times. Iran also had a very long border with the USSR and a major threat in Saddam Hussein to the west. And remember, half of Europe was under communism at the time, along with many other countries. Franco was ruling Spain, and Saudi Arabia was beheading people publicly. Compared to many others, Iran was more free, and the Shah was not a bloodthirsty despot he is often portrayed as. Now back to the video. This is another part where Simon talks about what people thought would happen after the revolution. Listen.
He was in charge. The referendum in April 1979 formalized the creation of an Islamic republic, and with the constitution that followed, all powerful authority was handed to Ayatollah Khomeini. And that's where things started to get rather radical. Suddenly, the left-leaning students who had participated in the protest against the Shah and who thought they were getting democracy came face to face with the reality of the Iranian Revolution, suppression in a very different form.
Right here, when he says some people thought they were getting democracy. No, none of the people who actively participated in the revolution believed they were getting democracy. The most liberal group, the National Front, the same alliance that supported Mossadegh in the 1950s, was against women's suffrage and opposed to the Shah's white revolution, which granted women the right to vote. Then there was Nehzat Azadi, or the Freedom Movement, which split from the National Front because they believed it was not Islamic enough. Then you have the Mujahideen, or MEK, an Islamo-Marxist group formed because they thought the Freedom Movement was too moderate and an armed resistance is required to take down the regime. There was also Fadayan, another communist group, and the Tudeh Party, the Communist Party backed by the USSR. Add to that the Islamic Council of Clerics and the Islamic Association Coalition and, you name it. All of these groups, including Ayatollah Khomeini, knew exactly what they wanted. In fact, Khomeini had already published a book, Velayat al-Faqih, years earlier, clearly outlining how the Islamic State should be governed. Anyone who supported him should have known what he intended. The leftist communists thought they can push him aside after the revolution, but he did the reverse. Up to this point, most of what I believe is misrepresented is related to the past, mainly pre-1979 Iran. But the next issue is about January, and to me, it's the most important problem with the video.
Unrest. Students poured onto the streets, chanting, "Death to Khomeini, neither Gaza nor Lebanon, my life for Iran, and we are all together."
Two of the most important slogans are missing. This is the last battle, Pahlavi will return, and long live the Shah, or long live the king. Then, later in the video, he again fails to mention whose name people were chanting, whose pictures they were holding, and what flags they were waving. People called for Pahlavi in the streets, and he responded by calling on them to protest at a very specific time, January 8 and January 9 at 8 p.m. Millions took to the streets, and the government massacred them. To sum things up, I want to repeat that I'm still very pleased that this popular channel chose to cover the issue of the Iranian Islamic regime and its atrocities. There's also another video on executions and hangings in Iran on the same channel that is worth watching. However, the pattern of ignoring or discrediting the Persian monarchy and anyone associated with it, like Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, and the will of the people in calling for his return appears here again, which is very unfortunate. Thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe for more.